welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Today we're stepping into the fascinating and sometimes intimidating world of scientific journals.
Specifically, you wanted to know more about what journal editors look for.
So we're peeking behind the curtain at Matter, a pretty cool journal in the material science world.
They've got these editorials, matter of opinion, where they don't hold back on what they call archetype rejections.
Right, these editorials caught my eye because they're surprisingly funny.
They lay out common pitfalls that make editors hit the reject button, and they do it using all these food analogies. We've got masala, substitutions, the works.
It's refreshing, actually.
What I found fascinating was that while these editorials are geared toward researchers, the pitfalls they highlight are relevant to anyone, really.
Mm-hmm. Whether you're pitching an idea at work, writing a report, or even just trying to convince a friend to watch your new favorite show, understanding how to frame your work to make it stand out is crucial.
Exactly.
And that's what these editorials get at.
They're like a crash course in what not to do if you want to capture someone's attention, which, let's be honest, we all want, right?
Absolutely.
So let's dig into their 2019 editorial where they first introduced these archetypes.
The first one is the substitution, and they use a great analogy here.
Imagine swapping out milk chocolate chips for semi-sweet in your grandma's famous cookie recipe.
The cookies might be good, but they're not exactly groundbreaking.
And in research, this translates to taking an existing study and just switching out one element.
The example they give is using HBN instead of graphene.
It might be solid science, but if the underlying mechanisms and outcomes are essentially the same, it lacks that aha moment that top-tier journals crave.
It reminds me of that feeling when you're reading something and you think, okay, so what?
It's not that the information is bad, it's just not particularly exciting or unexpected.
And in a world saturated with information, you need that element of surprise to cut through the noise.
Couldn't agree more.
Speaking of which, the next archetype, the incremental, really highlights that need for a significant leap forward.
Imagine training for a marathon and shaving off a few seconds each week.
It's progress, sure, but you wouldn't call it headline news.
And in the research world, the incremental refers to those studies that present small incremental advancements.
While valuable for moving a field forward, they lack that big picture impact that journals like Matter are looking for.
They're hungry for those paradigm-shifting discoveries, not just another small step in the right direction.
It's like they're saying, show us something we've never seen before.
Right.
Don't just tell us what we already know. Give us that wow factor.
Now the next one, the APAB equals AB, sounds almost deceptively simple. What's that all about? This one is all about predictability.
Think of adding hot sauce to your food. You know it's going to make it spicier.
It's not exactly groundbreaking, right?
And in research, the APB equals AB refers to studies where the results are precisely what you'd expect from simply combining two known elements.
They even give the example of adding silver nanoparticles to achieve antimicrobial properties.
It's a given at this point, not a novel finding.
It's like those cooking shows where the contestants just throw a bunch of random ingredients together hoping for the best.
Sometimes it works, but more often than not, you end up with a dish that's, well, less than the sum of its parts.
Exactly. The real magic happens when you understand the interplay of those ingredients and how they create something truly unique.
And that brings us to the last archetype in this first editorial, the super niche.
Now, this one feels particularly relevant for anyone who's ever been told their interests are too niche.
It does, doesn't it?
Imagine writing a best-selling novel about something only a handful of people in the world are truly passionate about.
It's a tough sell.
And the same principle applies to research.
While a study on the mating rituals of a rare Amazonian beetle might be fascinating to a select few, it lacks that broad appeal that a journal like Matter, which aims for a wider audience, is looking for.
It's a good reminder that context is everything.
A study that might be perfectly suited for a specialized journal could get lost in the shuffle of a broader publication.
Absolutely. It's all about finding the right platform for your work.
Now, before we move on to the 2024 editorial, I think it's important to emphasize that just because a paper fits into one of these archetypes doesn't mean it's destined for rejection.
The editors themselves make that clear.
These are just common pitfalls, not automatic deal breakers.
Right. It ultimately comes down to how the research is framed and the so what factor.
Exactly. Even a seemingly simple substitution can be groundbreaking if it leads to truly unexpected and impactful results.
It's all about highlighting that why should we care element.
And speaking of why should we care, the Matter editors doubled down on these archetype rejections in a follow-up editorial in 2024.
It seems they were just getting warmed up.
This time, they identified 4 more common pitfalls. And again, while they're using the language of scientific publishing, the underlying message is universally applicable.
What I find intriguing about this second editorial is that it shows the editors are engaged.
They're paying attention to trends, spotting patterns in the submissions they receive.
That tells me they're invested in maintaining the journal's quality and relevance, which is a good sign no matter what field you're in.
Absolutely.
It's like having a finger on the pulse of what's happening in the research world.
So let's dive into these new archetypes, shall we?
The first one is the 4.0. And it's one of my favorites because the analogy is so spot on.
Okay, hit me with it.
Imagine a sleek, high-performance sports car.
It's got all the bells and whistles, a dazzling paint job. It looks impressive on paper.
But then you pop the hood, and there's no engine.
Ouch.
All style, no substance.
Exactly.
And in research, the 4.0 refers to those studies that boast impressive numbers, those flashy performance metrics, without adequately explaining the why behind them.
It's like saying, our new material is 10 times stronger, but failing to delve into the underlying mechanisms that make it so.
So it's like acing a test without understanding the material.
You might get the grade, but you haven't actually learned anything.
Precisely.
It's all about superficial achievements versus true understanding and impact.
Which I think is a relevant distinction in any field, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's a good reminder to always ask ourselves, what's driving these numbers, and are we focused on the right things?
Now, the next archetype, the Masala study, feels particularly relevant for our listeners who, like me, can sometimes get overwhelmed with too much information.
I was thinking the same thing.
This one feels very relatable.
So, what's the Masala study all about?
This one's all about focus, or rather, the lack thereof.
Think of those Bollywood movies that try to cram in everything: action, romance, comedy, drama, all in one go.
It might sound exciting on paper, but it can quickly become overwhelming and ultimately less impactful.
And that's essentially what the Masala study does in the research world.
It tries to tackle too much in a single paper, diluting its core message.
You've mentioned before how much you value focused learning, and I think this archetype speaks directly to that.
It's a reminder that sometimes less is more, especially when trying to communicate complex ideas effectively.
It's like that old saying, if you chase 2 rabbits, you'll catch none.
Focus on your most compelling finding and present it with clarity and depth. Don't spread yourself too thin.
Now, shifting gears a bit, the next archetype is all about presentation, the oversold, undersold.
This one resonates with me because it speaks to the importance of understanding your audience and tailoring your message accordingly.
It's like going into a sales pitch without knowing who you're talking to or the true value of what you're selling.
You're either promising the moon without the rocket fuel,
Yeah.
or you're burying the genuinely exciting aspects under a mountain of technical jargon.
It's all about finding that sweet spot.
Presenting your research with confidence and enthusiasm without overselling or underselling its significance.
It's a delicate balance, for sure.
And it highlights the importance of storytelling, even in scientific communication.
You need to capture your audience's attention and make them care about your work.
Absolutely.
Now, last but not least, we have the repackaged, which feels like a close cousin to the substitution.
Right.
Remember how the substitution was about swapping out one ingredient for another without changing the final product?
Well, the repackaged takes it a step further.
It's like taking an old recipe, dressing it up with a few new ingredients, maybe changing the plating, but ultimately serving the same dish.
You might have a few new components, but the core concept and the results are essentially unchanged.
The editors even give a hilarious example comparing it to those Drake posting memes where the same image gets recycled with slightly different captions.
That's a perfect analogy.
It's funny because it's true.
We see this all the time, not just in research, but in various fields.
The same ideas get recycled and repackaged as something new.
It underscores the importance of originality and demonstrating the value of your work.
Don't just rehash what's already been done. Find a fresh perspective, push the boundaries, and make your work stand out.
And that brings us back to the core message of both of these editorials.
Whether you're a scientist trying to publish groundbreaking research or anyone presenting an idea, you need to convey the so what.
Why should we care about this?
What problem are you solving?
And what makes your approach unique?
It all boils down to finding that spark, that element of surprise that makes your work stand out from the crowd.
And on that note, A huge thank you to you for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating and sometimes quirky world of scientific publishing. We hope you found it insightful. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.